today's presentation is really aimed at being as much as possible inspirational. We'll see if I manage that, but also a conversation. So please do use the chat and the Q&A. This is mostly a conversation starter and not really a lecture on how to use data beyond M&E. So yeah, objective of the session is to really open up the conversation. We had a chat yesterday in another session about how important it is to share use cases so that people can be inspired about their own data and see what they can achieve with their own organization. So I think we would all benefit if you shared your experience in the chat. So the plan is for me to give a quick introduction on how I got there and who I am, then give hopefully 2 inspiring examples of things I've seen work really well using data for something else than just monitoring and reporting to funders about the number of beneficiaries in the program. And then maybe talk about some barriers I've witnessed as well, and maybe open up a conversation around whether you have had a similar experience and whether you found some solutions. So briefly, how I got there. So that's not like a complete resume of my life, but the steps that got me thinking about data and data for good. So I started as an impact analyst at Crisis. So very much at Crisis, we had really tried to reduce the amount of monitoring we were doing by trying to automate as much as possible, but we were still using data mostly to do evaluation of our services. And I started to volunteer for DataKind, and then I was part of a Uptake.org fellowship. And in both cases, both these organizations were looking at data for something else than monitoring and evaluation. That's not to say that monitoring and evaluation is unnecessary or bad. I think it's great and necessary, and I think a lot of people should do it, and we should keep doing it better. But Uptake was very inspirational because I was part of a cohort of 8 fellows, and some people were using data to, for example, there was a food rescue charity where they needed to predict how much food they were going to rescue from different supermarkets and where the needs were most likely to be able to manage their stocks and their volunteers as best as possible. And they were using machine learning for that. And I thought, wow, that's really inspirational. Like, how can we think about it in slightly different ways than just assessing the number of people who go through our doors, which is a bit what I was doing at Crisis. And then I joined WeFarm, which was one of these organizations, still is, one of these organizations using machine learning for something else, completely different than monitoring and evaluation. So in short, WeFarm is a knowledge sharing platform, which now is an app, but back in the days when I started, I make it sound like I started in 1990 or something like that. It was only 3 years ago, but it was only based on SMS because the idea was to connect farmers in East Africa. And a lot of farmers in East Africa don't have access to internet. And if they do, it's very expensive. So WeFarm created that SMS forum, a bit like Stack Overflow, but working just through SMS. So you could send a question saying, for example, I don't know, my coffee has black spots on it, what should I do? And then the SMS would go through the WeFarm system, through a series of algorithms, and then would be sent out to candidates that have the most likely answer to your question. So this was done in 4 languages. And there was loads of use cases for machine learning. So for example, when the SMS arrives, there is a language detection model, then there is an intent detection model that detects whether the message that's arriving on the platform is a question or a response. Then there was a spam filter, then the candidate selection, so selecting the appropriate users who are more likely to have an answer to the question. And then spot suspicious users, because we were offering a free platform that was gaining a lot of traction in East Africa. And so we could see a lot of people just using the platform for everything ranging from vaguely inappropriate promotion of a service that had nothing to do with WeFarm, all the way up to like really abusive messages. So we were trying to kind of detect these users that were that were malicious, and that was actually quite a big success. So to start with, I put together this kind of suspicious user detection model, and the metrics were not very good. It was failing in 90% of the cases, and I was like, well, that's it. All of my dream of using machine learning for good is probably not realistic. But then actually reshaping the use case with the people in the organization and thinking about how we could use that model that was wrong in 90% of the cases, well, it turned out that 90% wrong was still like 1 in 10 times right, which was 400 times more efficient than our current system, which was very reactive and basically random. So that was one example of how machine learning could make a direct impact on farmers, which was really rewarding. I can't see questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to ask the questions, but I'll give time for questions at the end and open up the conversation. But do feel free to share on the chat any thoughts, any questions, any feedback. So then the other organization, which I currently work for, Impact on Urban Health, I think it's a really great use of data. We're a funder. We're an organization that's focused on improving health in urban areas. And we do this through partnering with other organizations to gather data, produce robust evidence, include lived experience, and all of this to design practical interventions to make London healthier. In an effort to really make a step change in what we decide to tackle, we've decided to focus our strategy on 2 boroughs, so Lambeth and Southwark, and 4 health issues. So the one I'm going to talk about today is air pollution. We also work to reduce the impact of multiple long-term conditions, childhood obesity, and adolescent mental health. And I think we make a slightly different use of data to other funders, because talking to other funders, I've seen a lot of data is used for essentially business intelligence, so asking the question, what do we fund, or who do we fund? Whereas I think we're more focused on what should we fund. And so the example I'm going to talk about now is really this. So we were using open data to identify areas where there is the most vulnerability and the most exposure to air pollution. So we created this vulnerability score in partnership with another pro bono organization. And then we also created a score for exposure to air pollution. And then overlaying the two, we looked at which areas were most likely to be at high risk and also highly exposed, and then created a Tableau dashboard. I'm sure those of you who are familiar with Tableau can recognize the style of it. And that allowed us to really see which areas are most likely to be exposed and which areas are most likely to be vulnerable, and how can we target our interventions to the people who need it most and where we're more likely to have a bigger impact. So whilst I'm talking about all of these success stories, over the past, 7 years, 8 years, I've been working in data in the charity sector. I've witnessed a lot of barriers for this to be done well. I know Dulce's written a blog on exactly that, and I fully agree with what was written, probably because we work together at DataKind and therefore see a lot of the same things, but also I think a lot of us have shared these experiences. So really keen to hear in the chat whether you have similar experiences, if not, why, and whether you have solutions to these challenges. So one challenge that I've actually been quite lucky, and I haven't really encountered too much, but it's the difficulty to get senior leadership buy-in. So Crisis, I think, was very at the forefront of having their own database, using their data. We were 2 analysts and a manager, which is, I think, twice as many as other organizations. So I was actually quite lucky when I started, and therefore I've always been very careful to choose organizations that are like truly data led, or at least truly trying to be. And the same with impact on urban health. There is buy-in from senior leadership, which makes it infinitely easier. But I think it's really rare. I think I've been very lucky. The other thing that I've been really fighting has been like very extreme expectations, ranging from I don't see why data would be useful for my job, all the way to, can you not just do this AI thing that's going to solve the problem? And I think both are very unhelpful, because usually the truth lies kind of in between, and defining really the use case where data is really going to bring value. That's the example I shared with WeFarm was very much that, where no, we couldn't find just like this AI bot that would detect all the time with 100% accuracy all those suspicious users. But what we could do is really increase the efficiency of our current system with a human in the loop who would validate the results from the model. And I think having an audience who is keen to listen to what was possible and really help us define the use case made it really easy to create a valuable product. I think it's also really rare that it actually works. So yeah, keen to hear how you've been doing it in the past and how you've managed to create that environment where defining your use case is easy. Then I think a lot of people working in Data4Good will recognize the problem of the jack of all trade data person. You get hired for one job, and before you know it, you're suddenly being a data engineer, a data analyst, a data advocate, or like training of trainers provider, and you have this expectation that any data thing falls under your remit, and you have to have an infinite number of skills, which I think makes it hard to find the right person, and also like kind of discouraging for the person, right? And then the last thing, which I think is a really important one, is ethical issues, which I'm really keen to have more conversations about. I think a lot of the times on the basis that data has been used either for like really bad use cases or with good intentions but with terrible consequences, people tend to be quite scared of it and be quite scared to even approach it. And I think particularly at Impact on Urban Health, we're trying to really open up the conversation around how can we do data responsibly, because we recognize that not doing it also has consequences. So badly targeting your interventions and not targeting your interventions to the people who need it the most is as bad as, or could be worse, or could be as bad as using data that's not perfect. So really opening up the conversation around what are we risking if we don't do anything? What are we risking if we do it? How can we compensate for the data we don't have, for the bias in the data, for our own biases? How do we make sure that we have the infrastructures and the institutions in place that we have that space to talk about it? I think is really important. So that's all from me. But I'm really interested to hear what other people have to say. If you have any feedback, if you have any experiences of successes. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention. So So on the WeFarm, how many SMS users on the platform? It's 2.4 million as of March, but I may be wrong because it's growing. So it may be 2.5 by now. And it's for Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. In Africa, what data sources and types were used to train the ML algorithm? Yeah, that's a really good question about the data sources. So it depends on the algorithm. On the suspicious user one, we had a system where we had sort of like a rules-based engine-ish, which was really clunky and that users adapted to anyway. So it wasn't great, but we did have some label data by our team members. So in English, we were doing it as a data team, but in the 3 other languages, our African team members were helping checking profiles and flagging the ones that were suspicious or that were malicious. So we had some label data that way. And then we trained a model that was not very good, that flagged another set of profiles to try and gather more data. In terms of challenges, there were loads. Like it takes a lot of time to label data. It's harder than it looks. I could talk about this for hours, but I think data labeling is really not. People think, oh, it's very easy. You show someone a message and they just have to decide whether it's spam or not. And you think it's obvious because obviously the spams that you see the most common ones will be very obviously spam, but there is a whole lot of like gray areas, which is really hard to define and which depends on cultural perception as well of what's acceptable, what's not. There was also simply like the experience of people reading between the lines. So a message that I thought seemed okay, my African colleagues were like, no, that's definitely not okay. That's going to be a scam. Like this user is going to try to then take the user out of the platform and then scam them through another mean. So it took a lot of talking with other team members and like sitting down and going through data manually. And I think I vastly underestimated the amount of resources and effort that you need to put into your data collection for it to be valuable. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, because there was a lot of other problems, like the fact that we had such a small amount of labeled users as malicious. It was really hard to then not overfit. But then talking about it with other fraud detection people, looking at like financial fraud detection, I was told this was kind of inherent to the problem of kind of anomaly detection, fraud detection. So that's why we kept a human in the loop and made sure that there was a process around reviewing suspicious users as opposed to trying to automate it. I think the reviewing the expectation was really important as well. I'm going to read. So, conversation with Claire, another member of our social data society, inspired this longer blog on barriers to data science in the social sector. Thanks, Dulcie. David, I worked with a hospital-focused emergency patient number, used Sheffield University natural learning algorithm, established 28 daily in a cycle in the data. But data quality was not good enough at the time, 20 years ago, to program resources. We were ahead of our time. Internet searches took 4 hours to come back with results then. Yeah, I think it's interesting how the technology has evolved to make it so, like, to make some things that were really hard before, like kind of trivial now. Like you can run 200 regressions in like a second. When I was studying economics, even the teachers at university were like, "Oh, that was so hard to do back in the days." Thanks for sharing, David. Dominic, I was involved with a project for Amnesty International that used ML to spot which areas and village in Darfur had been attacked using satellite images over time. We had an ML expert and created a ground truth data set to train model on. Having experts in ML roles is very important. And we use Mechanical Turk platform or equivalent for a labeled data set. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Dom. I think the labeling is quite a challenge. Okay, so what type of algorithm are most commonly used to make decisions at your organization? So currently, at Impact on Urban Health, we don't use any ML at the moment. We have a couple of projects using natural language processing to try and look through some GP notes to detect the presence of social issues that people, like patients, talk about with their GPs and see how, like, the interaction between social determinants of health and health outcomes. So that's a feasibility study at the moment. And at WeFarm, it varied. So we had, to start with, all of our platform was Bayesian, because it seemed to be the neatest, easiest, fastest, not fastest, but the kind of most transparent algorithm to use whilst we were all developing the platform in Clojure. And then we moved to Python, which opened up the possibility of using better, newer libraries. And at that point, we changed. So the suspicious user model was, I think it was just an AdaBoost. Yeah, it was just an AdaBoost decision tree. So decision trees, AdaBoosted. But our spam filter was an ensemble of, I think, like 20 models, including regressions, actually, was the most performing ones. So it's different types of regressions ensembled into a model. I'm a big fan of regression. I think it often performs quite well, but I wouldn't religiously stick to it. I think it really depends on the use case and the data. Dulcie, you started in data analytics before moving to lots of machine learning, all in social sector. Any favorite resources for people looking to do something similar career-wise? Oh, that's a good question. DataKind, I think, is a great resource. I actually think that has been, to me, it's been a great way to like meet other like-minded people, get some help from more experienced data scientists through different events, meet charities that are data-driven, which also is a big part of like making a move towards organizations that are like good at data. So I would say, yeah, I owe a lot of my career to DataKind, really. In terms of resources, I follow a lot of blogs. The Towards Data Science platform is great. And yeah, I follow a lot of newsletters so that I can learn what's going on, what's like hot in the data world, which I think is a great way to be inspired. And yeah, Data Elixir is a really good one. I'm trying to find like precise resources rather than just, yeah, Data Elixir towards data science. And then in terms of learning, I used DataCamp, but then I stopped using DataCamp because of some, so that their CEO sexually harassed a colleague and it was not very well dealt with. The CEO has now stepped down and I think it's better dealt with. But at the time I was like, I don't want to support that organization. But their resources are really good. I think there are alternative resources. Even some of the tutors who were tutoring on DataCamp shared other resources. So maybe it's worth having a quick Google around. Is this database of scam labeled SMS available publicly, or will it be for other projects to train their ML algorithm and avoid scammers? So I don't work at WeFarm anymore. So I don't know if there are any plans to make it available. When I was there was no plan to opening that data. Saying this, it's worth reaching out to them, because while some of the data is very valuable and probably intellectual property that can't be shared, I think scam and spam is probably much less valuable from a business perspective and much more valuable for the world. So it's definitely a great suggestion for an open source project. Thanks for suggesting, Theo. Do you think that natural language programming could be used to get info of numbers of beneficiaries from text-based document of annual outcome reports of charities on their website? Yes, but I think there is easier way to get it. Normally they report, like charities report on it pretty easily. So I would err on the side of simplicity and just ask the charities to report it if it's not already on their website. Usually in the annual report, this is part of the key stats. So granted that for some smaller charities, it might not be. But yeah, I'd say depending on the use case. Sorry, David, if I'm not being very helpful. They don't put number in their main charity commission website. So on number of beneficiaries, yeah, I thought it was. Sorry, my memory of my NCVO days are failing me. I thought this was part of the kind of annual report. So the charity commission would report on income and expenditure, but the annual report of the charity might have numbers on beneficiaries. If they don't report it on their annual report, yeah, I think it's hard to give advice without having the use case in mind. I think the charity commission is quite hard to influence. At NCVO, there was a whole project on using the data from PDFs that were published, and just changing the fact that it was reported in a PDF. That never happened. So I would say trying to ask the charity commission to report for that number is probably not the easiest way. I don't think it's for lack of their. I think they understand. I think it's just complicated for them. There is a lot going on. So probably the website of the charities might be scrapable, or their annual reports would have that. And if it's possible, then maybe a quick survey, like a primary data collection. I don't know if that's an option. If it's for national stats, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, I second Dulce's comment on the fact that regular expressions would probably be enough to find number of beneficiaries. I would say that if a charity has number of on their number of beneficiaries, they would probably want to publish it because that's such an important stat. So if they're not publishing it, they probably don't own it, which is a problem in itself. Yeah, so in the format, I think regular expressions can get you a very long way in extracting entities from text. I've done some work on this when I was at WeFarm, looking at could we track the price of maize through just these like one-off interactions with farmers, and with just regular expressions, I could actually very accurately predict, or not predict, but extract SMS that contained the price of maize and extract the actual price and we could follow the trend of like real time of the price of maize, which was like a pretty exciting finding for us. But also for me, it was a bit of a light bulb moment where I realized that regular expressions could go that far. I thought I would lose so much data because it's kind of inaccurate and a bit of a blunt tool. But actually they go really, really far. I think is there any more Q&A? I think we're getting to the end of... Okay. The price of maize extract tool, it wasn't, I don't want to call it a tool, it was just a regular expression, which is a way to match, instead of matching a straight string, so just saying like match the word price of maize, it's matching in a, like, anything that contains the word price followed by any character followed by maize, for example. I think Dulcie is explaining this much better than me. Yeah, I think we're getting, I was gonna say we're getting to the end of this session. Thank you very much for the interaction and for all of the interesting question and answer, and for the suggestion for WeFarm to open their scam data. It was a pleasure to be here. Have a lovely lunch. And please be in touch on either on this platform or on LinkedIn if you want to talk more about Data for Good. Definitely something I like to talk about.